Daniel Cole had been counting the days on the wall of his cell for 6 months. Each scratch in the cold metal was a reminder that he was still alive, even if he did not understand why. The Empire did not keep prisoners for long. Everyone knew that. Humans who crossed into their space were killed quickly, usually within hours. But Daniel was still breathing, still waiting, still wondering what they wanted from him. The cell was small and dark. A thin beam of purple light came through a crack in the ceiling, the only sign that a sun existed somewhere beyond these walls. Daniel spent most of his time sitting in the corner, thinking about his crew. There had been 7 of them on the survey ship Wanderer, good people, friends. They had been mapping asteroid fields near the border when the warships appeared. The attack came without warning. Daniel remembered the screams, the fire, the terrible sound of the hull breaking apart. He remembered being dragged from the wreckage by soldiers with gray skin and black eyes. He remembered asking about his crew and receiving only silence. He knew they were dead. He had seen enough to know. But he still asked every time a guard came with food. He asked because it felt like the right thing to do, because someone should remember them. On the morning of his 183rd day in captivity, the guards came for him. There were 4 of them, tall and thin, their faces showing no emotion. They put chains on his wrists and ankles and led him through long corridors carved from black stone. Daniel did not resist. He had learned early that resistance only brought pain, and he wanted to save his strength for whatever came next. The corridors opened into a vast hall filled with light. Daniel blinked and tried to adjust his eyes. The hall was enormous, bigger than any building he had ever seen on Earth. Thousands filled the seats that rose on every side, their dark eyes watching him with cold curiosity. At the far end of the hall sat a throne made of something that looked like bone, and on that throne sat Emperor. Daniel had never seen the Emperor before, but he recognized him immediately. Was larger than the other, his gray skin marked with golden patterns that showed his royal blood. His eyes were not black like his subjects but deep red, burning with an intelligence that made Daniel uncomfortable. This was a being who had conquered 100 worlds. This was a being who saw humans as insects. The guards forced Daniel to his knees before the throne. The chains pulled tight against his skin. He kept his head up and looked directly at the Emperor because he refused to die staring at the floor. Studied him for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice filled the entire hall without effort. The translating device in Daniel's ear turned the alien words into English, flat and mechanical. You are the human called Daniel Cole. Your ship violated our sacred borders. Your species has been declared a threat to the Empire. The punishment for this crime is death. Daniel said nothing. He had expected this. Before sentences carried out, the Emperor continued, you may speak. Beg for mercy if you wish. It amuses us to hear lesser creatures plead. The crowd made sounds that might have been laughter. Daniel felt their contempt like a weight pressing down on him. He thought about what he could say. He thought about begging, about trying to explain that the border crossing was an accident, that they had been following a signal that might have been a distress call. But he knew it would not matter. They had already decided his fate. Nothing he said would change that. So instead, he said something else. I do not ask for mercy for myself, but I ask that you send word to Earth about my crew. Their families deserve to know what happened to them. They deserve to grieve. The hall went silent. Emperor leaned forward on his throne, his red eyes narrowing. You ask nothing for yourself. No bargaining, no tears. My crew were good people, Daniel said. Park was going to get married when we returned home. Brooks had a daughter he had never met. Lisa Tran wanted to write a book about the stars we discovered. They did not deserve to die in the dark forgotten. That is all I ask. Let their families know. The Emperor stared at him for a long time. Something flickered in those red eyes, though Daniel could not tell what it was. Confusion, perhaps, or anger. They did not seem to understand what he was doing. High above the throne, on a balcony reserved for the royal family, Princess watched the human with growing interest. She had seen hundreds of executions in this hall. Criminals, rebels, prisoners of war. They all reacted the same way. They begged, they screamed, they cursed, they wept. None of them had ever asked for something like this. None of them had thought about anyone but themselves in their final moments. Was the 3rd daughter of Emperor, which meant she was important enough to attend court but not important enough to matter. She had spent her whole life watching from balconies, learning the ways of power without ever being allowed to use it. She had learned to keep her thoughts hidden, to smile when she felt sick, to applaud when she wanted to scream. The Empire was built on cruelty, and she had accepted that as the natural order of things. But watching this human, this small and fragile creature kneeling in chains, she felt something she had not felt in years. She felt doubt. The Emperor made his decision. You will die in the arena in 3 days. The people will watch you torn apart by beasts, and they will see the weakness of humanity. Your request is, your crew will be forgotten, as all humans will be forgotten when we finish what we started. The guards dragged Daniel away. He did not struggle. He did not cry out. He simply walked, his head still held high, until he disappeared through the doors. Remained on her balcony long after the crowd had left. She could not stop thinking about the human's eyes. There had been no fear in them, no hatred, only sadness and something that looked almost like peace. That night she went to the restricted archives and began searching for files on humanity. What she found there would change everything. The border incident that had captured Daniel Cole was not an accident. It had been planned by her own father to justify a new war. The humans had not violated space. They had been lured there and slaughtered for political convenience. Closed the files and sat alone in the darkness, feeling the foundations of her world begin to crack. The prison beneath the imperial palace was a place where hope came to die. The walls were thick and cold, built to hold creatures far stronger than humans. Guards walked the corridors at all hours, their footsteps echoing like heartbeats in the darkness. No one escaped from this place. No one even tried. Daniel sat in his cell and waited for death. He had accepted it now. 3 days was not long, but it was enough time to make peace with the universe. He thought about his mother back on Earth, about the small house where he had grown up, about the night sky he had loved since childhood. He thought about his grandfather, who had worked in the shipyards and dreamed of traveling to other worlds. Daniel had carried that dream all his life. He had seen things his grandfather could never have imagined. That was enough. That had to be enough. On the second night, he heard footsteps approaching his cell. They were lighter than the guards, more careful. Daniel looked up and saw a figure in a dark cloak standing at the bars. The figure pulled back the hood, and he found himself staring at a female with silver patterns on her gray skin. Her eyes were not red like the Emperor's, but a pale violet, almost gentle. "You are the human," she said. Her voice was quiet, as if she was afraid of being heard. "I am," Daniel replied, "and you are not a guard." "No," she hesitated, then spoke again. "I am called. I watched your trial. I wanted to understand something." Daniel studied her face. There was something different about her, something that did not match the cold cruelty he had seen in others. She looked troubled, uncertain, like someone carrying a weight too heavy to bear alone. "What do you want to understand?" he asked. "Why you showed no fear. Why you asked for nothing for yourself. Our people believe humans are savage and selfish, driven only by greed and violence. But you did not act like the monster we were told to expect." Daniel almost laughed. "Your people killed my crew. They captured me, tortured me, and now they plan to feed me to beasts for entertainment. And you wonder why I am not afraid?" "Yes." He thought about her question for a long moment. It deserved a real answer. "Fear is natural," he said finally. "Every human feels fear, but we learn that fear is not the same as defeat. My grandfather used to say that courage is not about having no fear. Courage is about doing what is right even when you are terrified. I am afraid, princess, but I will not let that fear take away my dignity. It is the only thing I have left." Gripped the bars of his cell. Her violet eyes searched his face as if looking for a lie. "Tell me about your world," she said. "Tell me about humanity." So Daniel told her. He spoke of Earth, the blue planet with its oceans and mountains and endless variety of life. He spoke of human history, the wars and the suffering, but also the moments of beauty and kindness. He told her about music and art, about the way humans could look at a sunset and feel something impossible to describe. He told her about his family, about the love that connected them across distances too vast to measure. Listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Everything I have been taught says your kind is dangerous," she said. "That you are conquerors who destroy everything you touch, but you speak of love and beauty. You speak of your crew as if they were family. This does not match what I know." "Maybe what you know is wrong," Daniel said gently. She flinched as if he had struck her. "I am beginning to understand that." Visited him again the next night and the night after that. Each time she stayed longer, asked more questions, shared more of her own doubts. She told him about growing up in the shadow of her father's throne, about watching the empire swallow world after world, about the guilt that had grown inside her with each passing year. She had always believed the conquests were necessary, that they were bringing order to a chaotic galaxy. Now she was not sure of anything. "I found records," she whispered on the third night. "Your ship did not violate our borders. My father arranged the whole thing. He wanted an excuse to restart the war against humanity. He has been manufacturing enemies for years, using fear to keep the noble houses united behind him." Daniel closed his eyes. He had suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed still hurt. His crew had died for nothing, for political games. "What will you do with this knowledge?" he asked. His hands trembled. "I do not know. If I speak out, I will be killed. My father does not tolerate dissent, even from his own children. But if I stay silent, I become part of the lie. I become just as guilty as him." "That is a choice only you can make," Daniel said. "But I will tell you something my grandfather told me. The universe does not care about what is easy. It only remembers what is right." Before she could respond, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Heavy footsteps, not the careful ones of a princess sneaking through shadows, pulled up her hood and disappeared into the darkness just as Crown Prince appeared at Daniel's cell. Was tall and cruel, his red eyes burning with contempt. He looked at Daniel the way someone might look at an insect. "My sister has been visiting you," he said. "It was not a question. I have eyes everywhere in this palace. She has forgotten that." Daniel said nothing. "You have filled her head with poison," continued. "Human lies about mercy and compassion. These weaknesses have no place in our empire. Tomorrow you will die in the arena, and my sister will watch. She will learn what happens to those who question the natural order." He turned and walked away, his footsteps fading into silence. Daniel sat alone in his cell, knowing that tomorrow would bring either death or something he could not yet imagine. Somewhere in the palace above, Princess was making a choice that would change the fate of two civilizations. She would not let an innocent man die, not for her father, not for an empire built on lies. The morning light would bring the arena, but it would also bring something the emperor had never expected. Rebellion. The Grand Colosseum of Ara was older than the empire itself. It had been built in an age when the still fought among themselves, a monument to blood and victory. The stone walls had witnessed 1,000,000 deaths. The sand floor had drunk enough blood to fill an ocean. Now it served as entertainment for the masses, a place where enemies of the state were torn apart for the pleasure of the crowd. Daniel stood at the gate and looked out at the arena. The stands rose up on every side, filled with who had come to watch him die. Their voices blended into a single roar of anticipation. Above them, in the royal box, Emperor sat on his portable throne with his family arranged around him. Daniel could see Princess in the second row, her face pale, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. The guards removed his chains and gave him a blade. It was a simple thing, barely longer than his forearm, designed to give the condemned a false hope. Daniel tested its weight and found it acceptable. He had trained with similar weapons during his years as a surveyor. Hostile worlds required hostile skills. A horn sounded, low and deep, and the gate on the opposite side of the arena began to rise. Daniel watched as something emerged from the darkness beyond. There was a nightmare given flesh. It stood 3 meters tall at the shoulder, covered in armored scales that gleamed like black metal. Its mouth was filled with teeth designed for crushing bone. 6 legs carried it forward with terrible speed, and its eyes, small and red and hungry, fixed on Daniel with predatory focus. The crowd cheered as the beast charged. Daniel did not run. Running would only trigger the creature's hunting instincts. Instead, he moved sideways, keeping in his vision while he studied its movements. He had survived on worlds where the wildlife made this creature look gentle. He knew that every predator had patterns, weaknesses, moments of vulnerability. He just needed to find them before the beast found his throat. The lunged. Daniel rolled to the side and felt the wind of its passing. He came up with his blade extended and scored a shallow cut along its flank. The creature roared in anger and spun faster than something that size should be able to move. Daniel barely avoided the sweeping tail that could have broken every bone in his body. Minutes passed. The crowd grew quiet. This was not the quick slaughter they had expected. The human was still alive, still moving, still fighting. He was covered in dust and sweat, bleeding from a wound on his arm where the creature had caught him with a claw, but he was not dead. He was not even close to dead. In the royal box, Emperor leaned forward with a frown. This was not entertaining anymore. This was embarrassing. A single human was making a fool of his prized killing beast. Princess watched with her heart pounding in her chest. She had never seen anything like this. Daniel moved with a grace that seemed impossible for his species, anticipating the creature's attacks, always staying one step ahead. This was not the behavior of a primitive savage. This was skill. This was survival instinct honed by years of experience. This was a human refusing to die. The grew tired. Its attacks became slower, less precise. Daniel had been waiting for this. He moved inside the creature's guard and drove his blade deep into the joint between its shoulder and leg. The beast screamed and collapsed onto its side, thrashing in pain but unable to rise. Daniel stood over the fallen creature, his blade ready for the killing blow. The crowd fell completely silent. In culture, this was the moment of truth. The victor always killed the defeated. Mercy was weakness. Compassion was failure. Every child learned this from birth. Daniel looked at it stared back at him with eyes that held pain and fear, the same emotions he had seen in the eyes of wounded animals on a dozen worlds. It was a beast, yes, but it had not chosen to be here. It had been bred for violence, trained to kill, thrown into this arena for the amusement of others. It was as much a prisoner as Daniel had been. He lowered his blade and stepped back. The watched him for a long moment, then slowly crawled away, dragging its injured leg. It did not attack. It did not try to fight. It simply retreated to the far corner of the arena and lay down, accepting that the battle was over. The silence in the Colosseum was absolute. No one had ever seen this before. No one knew how to react. The human had won, but he had not killed. He had shown mercy to a defeated enemy. Emperor rose from his throne, his red eyes blazing with fury. This human had ruined everything. The execution was supposed to demonstrate human weakness, not human strength. It was supposed to show the people that their enemies were pathetic, easily destroyed. Instead, it had shown them something else, something dangerous. Guards, the emperor shouted, kill the human now. Soldiers began moving toward the arena floor. Daniel watched them come and felt no fear. He had made his choice. He had shown who he really was. That was enough. Then a voice rang out across the Colosseum, clear and strong and impossible to ignore. I invoke the right of imperial claim. Every head turned toward the royal box. Princess was standing, her violet eyes fixed on her father, her whole body trembling but her voice steady. By the ancient laws of our empire, I claim this human as my personal property. He belongs to me. No one may touch him without my permission, not even the emperor himself. The crowd gasped. The guards stopped moving. Emperor stared at his daughter with an expression that mixed shock, rage, and something that might have been fear. You dare, he whispered. The law is clear, father. You wrote it yourself centuries ago to protect the privileges of the royal bloodline. I am invoking my birthright. This human is mine. The emperor could not refuse. To do so would mean violating the very traditions that gave his throne its legitimacy. The noble houses were watching. The common people were watching. If he broke the ancient laws for his own convenience, they would remember. Very well, he said through clenched teeth. Take your human, but know this, daughter, you have made an enemy today. Met his gaze without flinching. I know, father, I have been your enemy for longer than you realize. She walked down from the royal box and crossed the arena floor to where Daniel stood. She took his hand in hers, a gesture that made the crowd murmur with shock and confusion. Come, she said quietly, we have much to do. Together, the princess and the prisoner walked out of the arena, leaving behind a stunned empire and an enraged emperor. The game had changed. The rebellion had begun. The shuttle carried them away from the capital world, through layers of security that parted like water before the princess's authority. Daniel sat in silence, watching the stars streak past the viewport, trying to understand what had just happened. 1 hour ago, he had been ready to die. Now he was flying through space with the daughter of his greatest enemy, heading toward a future he could not imagine. Private estate was located on a small moon at the edge of the system, far from the politics and intrigue of the palace. It was a place she had built for herself over many years, a sanctuary where she could escape the weight of her bloodline. The buildings were simple and elegant, surrounded by gardens that grew plants from 100 different worlds. Servants moved quietly through the halls, loyal to alone. Daniel was given a room with a view of the stars. Medical staff tended to his wounds while he lay on a bed softer than anything he had felt in months. For the first time since his capture, he allowed himself to rest. He slept for 16 hours without dreaming. When he woke, was waiting for him. She sat in a chair by the window, watching the light of distant suns, her face marked by exhaustion and worry. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Alive," Daniel replied. "Thanks to you, though I still do not understand why you did it." Turned to face him. Her violet eyes held a depth of emotion he had not seen before. "I told you in the prison. I am tired of watching my empire destroy everything it touches. For years I told myself that the conquests were necessary, that the cruelty served a purpose. But watching you in that arena, seeing you show mercy to a creature that tried to kill you, I understood something. Strength does not require cruelty. Power does not demand destruction. You showed me another way." Daniel sat up slowly, mindful of his healing wounds. "I am just one human. I cannot change an empire." "No," agreed, "but together perhaps we can plant a seed." Over the following days she told him everything. The secret files she had found, the evidence of her father's manufactured wars, the growing discontent among the noble houses who had lost sons and daughters in conflicts that served no purpose except expanding the emperor's power. There were others who shared her doubts, she explained. Military officers who had seen too much death, scientists who believed the empire's isolation was leading to stagnation, common citizens who whispered about change but feared to speak aloud. "My father rules through fear," said. "He has convinced everyone that the alternative to his leadership is chaos and destruction. But fear is not loyalty. It is a cage, and cages can be broken." Daniel listened and thought about his own world. Humanity had faced tyrants before. They had risen, ruled, and eventually fallen because they forgot a simple truth. Power that rests on fear alone is always fragile. It only takes one crack for the whole structure to collapse. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "I want you to teach me," replied. "Teach me about humanity. Teach me about the things you value, the ways you have built societies that survive their leaders. Help me understand how to create something better than what we have." So Daniel became a teacher. In the quiet evenings on that distant moon, he shared stories of Earth's history. He told her about revolutions and reforms, about leaders who chose service over power, about ordinary people who stood against injustice and changed the course of nations. He told her about democracy and human rights, about the belief that every individual has value regardless of birth or status. These were not perfect systems, he admitted. Humans still struggled with greed and hatred and fear, but they kept trying. They kept believing that tomorrow could be better than today. Absorbed everything like someone dying of thirst who had finally found water. She asked questions that showed a brilliant mind trapped too long in narrow thinking. She challenged ideas and demanded explanations, and slowly began building a new philosophy from the pieces Daniel gave her. Meanwhile, the Empire was watching. Word of what happened in the arena had spread faster than light, carried by gossip and news feeds and whispered conversations in dark corners. The human who showed mercy, the princess who the emperor. These stories took on a life of their own, growing and changing with each retelling. Some called a traitor, others called her a hero. No one could ignore her. Messages began arriving at the estate, encrypted communications from nobles and officers and ordinary citizens who wanted to know more. Was it true? Was the princess really challenging her father? Was there hope for change? Answered each message carefully, building a network of allies one conversation at a time. But secrecy could not last forever. Crown Prince had spies everywhere, and he had not forgotten his sister's betrayal. On a cold night 3 weeks after the arena, received a warning from a contact in the palace guard. Her father had ordered her arrest. Ships were already on their way. "We have to leave," Daniel said when she told him. "Now, tonight." "Where can we go? My father controls every system in the Empire." Daniel thought about the star charts he had memorized during his years as a surveyor. There were paths through space that they did not patrol, routes through nebulae and asteroid fields that only experienced navigators knew. "I can get us to human space," he said. "It will be dangerous, but it is possible." Looked at him with something like wonder. "You would take me to your people, after everything my kind has done to yours." "Your kind did not do those things. Your father did, and right now you are the best hope for peace between our civilizations." He smiled, the first real smile he had given since before his capture. "Besides, I think my grandfather would have liked you." They left within the hour, taking only what they could carry and a small fast ship that could outrun most pursuit. As they broke orbit, activated a communication system linked to every broadcast frequency in the Empire. "My name is," she said into the recorder. I am the third daughter of Emperor, and I am no longer silent. My father has lied to you. He has manufactured wars and enemies to maintain his grip on power. Innocent people have died for his ambition. I renounce my title and my name. I call on every citizen who values truth and justice to stand against the lies. The empire we were promised does not exist, but perhaps together we can build something better." She transmitted the message just as the Imperial fleet appeared at the edge of the system. Daniel pushed the engines to maximum and aimed for the coordinates he had calculated. The ship jumped to hyperspace moments before the first weapons fired. Behind them, words spread like fire through dry grass, igniting a spark that would not be easily extinguished. The rebellion had found its voice, and the princess had become an exile heading toward an uncertain future among the very people her empire had tried to destroy. The border station called Haven's Rest floated in the empty space between empires, a place where neither human nor law applied. It had been built decades ago during a brief moment of hope, a neutral ground where enemies could meet without weapons. That hope had died long before Daniel was born, but the station remained, maintained by a small crew who believed that peace might someday return. Daniel guided their ship into the docking bay with hands that trembled from exhaustion. They had been running for 3 days, dodging patrols and hiding in asteroid fields, using every trick he had learned in his years of surveying hostile space. The small ship's engines were nearly burned out. They would not have lasted another day. Look through the viewport at the station's worn hull. This is where we ask your people for help. This is where we start, Daniel replied. The rest depends on you. The station commander was a retired naval officer named Grace, a woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much war. She listened to their story without expression, her fingers tapping a steady rhythm on her desk. When they finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You expect me to believe that a princess wants to help humanity," she said finally. "After decades of war, after everything your empire has done." Met her gaze without flinching. "I do not expect anything. I'm simply telling you the truth and offering what I can. My father plans to restart the war. He has been preparing for years. I can give you fleet positions, weapon specifications, details of his strategy. I can give you the evidence of his crimes. What you do with that information is your choice." Grace studied her for a long moment, then turned to Daniel. "And you trust her?" "I do," Daniel said without hesitation. "She saved my life when she had nothing to gain and everything to lose. She gave up her home, her family, her entire world because she believed it was right. That means something." Grace leaned back in her chair. "I will contact Admiral Marsh. She commands the defense fleet in this sector. Whether she will listen is another matter." Admiral Marsh arrived 2 days later aboard a warship called the Horizon. She was younger than Daniel expected, with sharp features and the careful posture of someone who had spent her whole life preparing for a war she hoped would never come. She listened to Story with the same skepticism that Grace had shown, but her expression changed when handed over the data files. "This is everything," said. "Fleet movements, communication codes, the names of every officer loyal to my father. And this is the evidence of the false flag attacks he used to justify the last war. Your people died for his lies. My people died for his lies. I want that to end." The Admiral reviewed the files in silence. When she looked up, there was something different in her eyes. Not trust exactly, but perhaps the beginning of it. "This will need to be," she said. "If it is authentic, it changes everything. But even if we believe you, what happens next? Your father will not simply step aside." "No," agreed. "But my broadcast has already caused damage. I have received word that 3 systems have declared support for reform. There is civil war beginning in the Empire, fighting between those loyal to my father and those who want change. The situation is fragile. If humanity offers support to the reformers, if you show that peace is possible, it could tip the balance." Before the Admiral could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the station. A fleet had emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the system. Not just any fleet. The Emperor's personal armada, 100 warships carrying enough firepower to reduce Haven's Rest to dust. Emperor's voice echoed through every speaker on the station, broadcast on all frequencies. "This is a message for the traitors who harbor my daughter. Return Princess to Imperial custody immediately. If you refuse, I will destroy this station and every human aboard it. You have 1 hour to comply." Daniel felt his heart sink. They had come so far, survived so much, only to face annihilation, but was already moving, already thinking. I need access to your communication systems, she said to Admiral Marsh. All frequencies, maximum range. Why? Because my father made a mistake. He followed me here personally, leaving the capital and the systems in rebellion unguarded. And he broadcast on all frequencies, which means every ship in his fleet and every citizen in the Empire can hear whatever I say next. The Admiral hesitated, then nodded. Give her access. Stood before the communication console and gathered her thoughts. This was the moment everything had been building toward. Not just her choice, but the choice of an entire civilization. People of the Empire, she said, her voice steady and clear. My father stands before you with a fleet designed to destroy a station that has never fired a weapon. He calls me a traitor for speaking the truth. He calls humans monsters for refusing to die quietly. But look at what is actually happening here. Look at who is threatening destruction and who is offering peace. She paused, letting her words sink in. I have seen humans up close. I have spoken with them, learned from them, traveled with them. They are not the savages we were told they were. They are people, as complicated and flawed and beautiful as we are. They showed me mercy when I had given them no reason for it. They offered me hope when I had none. She looked at Daniel, standing beside her, his face pale but determined. Today I ask you to make a choice, not between my father and me, between fear and hope, between the endless wars that have stolen our children and a future where we might finally know peace. My father cannot destroy this station without destroying the idea that change is possible. That is what he truly fears, not humans, not me, the possibility that you might choose something different. Her voice rose, carrying conviction that had been building for years. I am asking you, soldiers of the fleet, citizens of the Empire, anyone who has ever wondered if there might be a better way, lower your weapons, refuse the order, choose hope. Silence fell across the communication channels. The Imperial fleet held position, weapons still charged, waiting for the Emperor's command. The hour was not yet over, but something had already changed. The galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. Then one ship broke formation. A single cruiser, turning away from the station, broadcasting a message of its own. The captain declared that she would not fire on unarmed civilians, that she was finished fighting wars built on lies. Another ship followed, then another, then a dozen, then 50. Emperor screamed orders that no one obeyed. His command ship stood alone as his fleet crumbled around him, captains and crews choosing the future over the past. In the chaos, Crown Prince saw his opportunity. He had always wanted the throne, and now his father had shown weakness that could never be forgiven. The Emperor's own guard turned on him, not for sake, but for ambition, declared himself regent and immediately called for a ceasefire, recognizing that the Empire could not survive another war. Days later, Daniel and stood together at a diplomatic summit that would have been impossible a month before. Representatives from both civilizations sat across tables that had never hosted such conversations. The road ahead would be long and difficult. Peace was not built in a day, but for the first time in generations, it seemed possible. Looked out at the stars through a window that showed both human and ships floating in harmony. What will you do now? She asked Daniel. You could go home, see your family, rest. Daniel smiled, remembering his grandfather's dreams, remembering the crew who had died believing in something worth believing in. I spent my whole life exploring the stars, he said. Seems a shame to stop now. Besides, someone needs to show you the good parts of the galaxy, the places worth protecting. Took his hand, the same gesture she had made in the arena but different now. Equals, partners, friends. Then show me, she said. Together they walked toward the docking bay, toward a ship that would carry them into an uncertain but hopeful future. Behind them, two civilizations began the slow work of learning to trust each other. It had started with a condemned man who refused to hate. It had grown because a princess chose to listen. And it would continue because humanity, as always, refused to give up.